I'm only a little nervous. I came and rehearsed yesterday. I had a bad dream. I don't know whether I was standing on the stage naked or not, but I thought you'd gotten it wrong and you'd invited the wrong Henry. But it didn't stop me from walking out here and facing my fears to tell you what I hope you think will be an important American story. My family comes from a place of constant change. Along the border between Mexico and the United States, this picture was taken during a time when life along the border was much more blended and more fluid, when there wasn't a wall or a fence, and you might begin your day on one side and end your day on another. The morning in Mexico and the afternoon in the United States. And if this picture had been taken in 2015, as opposed to 1925, my grandmother would have been called illegal. She only lived to see my father become 12 years old, but she instilled in him a sense of duty and a sense of patriotism. There is a motto that is very familiar to Mexican Americans that says, "Si Dios quiere," if God is willing. But my grandmother saw something in her son that went beyond that motto, a strength, a willingness to be engaged and to be active, and she taught him a sense of duty to his country. This picture of him probably defines what was the most important experience of his life, serving his country. It was that service to the United States of America that created this intervention of the government in his life, the GI Bill, and allowed him to do what nobody in his family had ever been able to accomplish before. He graduated from college. In fact, he graduated from law school. He got married to a beautiful, strong woman. He had 4 children. And he moved to the suburbs of San Antonio, Texas, about 150 miles north of that border. And something happened. Instead of spending his life in the middle class, the emerging middle class of San Antonio, he decided that he would fight a war. And so he raised my sisters and I to always remember that no matter how good things were for us, that for our community and for the community of the United States, we were at war. This picture of a little boy, his son, was taken almost exactly 50 years ago, about the time of the signing of the Civil Rights Act, in Austin, Texas, during the presidency of LBJ, at a time when economic development for Mexican Americans was represented by $1.25 an hour. I didn't really understand, standing in that place 50 years ago, that would be the defining moment of my young life, and that this picture, with that little bitty face of that young man behind the older face of these 2 gentlemen who were probably born in Mexico, but who so proudly carried the American flag, would teach me that I could grow up to be a decent businessman and a pretty good designer. I could own an architectural practice. I could plan cities. But based on this experience, I would learn how to design movements. Now, this isn't a picture about getting a bro hug from the President of the United States. Although it is a bro hug from the President of the United States. It's about how the country has changed and yet remained the same over the course of 50 years and in the lives of 3 people, one who would have been called illegal, one who was the first to go to college, and his son, who ended up working for the President of the United States. I like to say that I get to stand on stages nowadays as the first openly gay, but also openly Latino, finance chairman of American political party. And it has given me the opportunity to see this country in a way that I never dreamed I would see it. I could never have imagined. And I have seen the mythology of the story that we tell as the American story, and it isn't the complete truth. It's given me chances to understand that the places that we populate and the way that we talk about ourselves is with a notion of purity in a country that is very mixed and is stronger when it is blended, just like the border that I grew up in. This is a book that says that it is about illuminating the American story for all people. But it is really about the fact that for many Americans, their stories have never been told. They've been treated as outsiders. There are no archives and no libraries and very few museums that have existed for Latinos living in the United States. And this notion of purity, of pilgrims as opposed to indigenous people, has colored the thinking of ourselves and the generations of students who look like us. It is really about taking this idea of a woman who would have said, if God wants it to happen, and in turn, making it an environment of engagement, of activism, of standing on the mall in Washington, D.C., and recognizing that, yes, there should be a National Museum of the American Latino, in the most important place where we tell our stories, where we inaugurate our presidents, and where we are meant to illuminate who we are for the rest of the world to understand. Those experiences of seeing this country in a different way led me to understand that people dream. Dreams are images, they are ideas, sometimes they're fears, and they happen when we sleep, but they happen most importantly when we're awake. There exists in our country today a new generation of people that some would call illegal. There are almost 1 million of them, and they are part of the population of 11 million immigrants living in this country who feel like they don't belong. And these dreamers have decided that they shouldn't leave their future up to anyone else except themselves. Most likely, there is a dreamer standing in this audience today. Every neighborhood, every community, most restaurants, many places of work, even in a city like the city that we're in today, means that you have come in contact with someone who is undocumented and standing by your side. There is a phenomenon amongst these highly motivated young people who have never known any other country except this country to achieve success. And yet there are barriers that stand in their way. A lack of financial assistance, a fear, the recognition that on any day you or your parents might be caught and returned to a country that you don't even remember and don't even know anymore. Many people would have you believe that this generation, these young people, give nothing to this country and only take. But when you have an opportunity to talk to them and to understand them and to see them for who they really are, you very quickly understand that they are contributors to the strength of our nation. In a world of hashtag activism, these dreamers have recaptured the lessons that my father taught me. I used to wonder sometimes why everybody in my neighborhood got the new car and I just got the next picket sign. These young people understand that without their activism, they have no future. About 2 years ago, at the very start of my term of office, I was introduced to a gentleman by the name of Don Graham, whose family owned the Washington Post, but who had spent his life engaged in educational activism, and instead of living a life of privilege, had decided, for example, that he should be a policeman. And he asked the question of what could we do to help this dream generation? That idea, that conversation, turned into a conversation with dream leaders from around the country. We organized ourselves and said, do you think we could raise $1 million for scholarships to help these young people who don't have access to any kind of funding? No Pell Grant, no scholarships. And over the course of the first 6 months, we raised $1 million. And then we raised $2 million. And within 6 months, we raised $26 million. And as of this... And as of this week, we've raised $80 million. With the dream of sending a generation of young Americans to school. Just like my dad. Just like my dad. Not necessarily the top of the class, but young people who understand what it's like to wonder where your next meal is coming from, who may only have a C average, but is so motivated to help create the future of this country. You sitting in this audience probably have seen some of these figures. It means that the future of our country is increasingly Latino and overwhelmingly immigrant. But I wonder if you see what I saw yesterday here in Grand Rapids. Did you know that 19% of your town is Latino? Did you know that 64% of the population of the public schools in your community is Latino? Did you know that, like my family, 90,000 of us come through your city every year to pick crops just north of Grand Rapids? I wish that I could have taken you with me yesterday when I went to visit the second grade class at Cesar Chavez Elementary School. And to see these bright young faces sitting on a map of the United States, so smart, so humble, so highly motivated to learn English. To learn English. In that moment of looking at the next generation of Grand Rapids, I began to understand that the lessons that my father and my mother and my grandmother taught me were absolutely right. That it's not enough to wait for things to happen. That maybe what my father always wanted us to do, come home on Friday night and watch labor leader training films. I'm sure I'm the only kid on the block who had to go home and watch labor leader training films on Friday night after my dad had had a few drinks. But yesterday, I understood that those lessons that I learned were what prepared me for the life that I've been given. I remember that there was one film in particular about the great immigrant experience of this country. It was called The Inheritance. And it was about the Italians coming to New York and the Irish coming to Pennsylvania and the steel mills and the garment district of what in the 20th century represented the great modern-day industrial revolution of our country, and that in the 21st century represents the great technological advance of our country. And in this film, it would say, freedom and opportunity are not your birthright. They weren't handed to your people on a silver platter. You have to work for them. You die for them. You day and night for them. And sometimes, some days, you earn them all over again. Every day, you earn it all over again. I'm incredibly proud to be here in your community, a community that represents the future of this country, that is wonderful and beautiful and filled with fear and optimism and hope, that together we can create a blended narrative of what makes this country great and that is represented by the young people of Grand Rapids.